that was funded. Got it. Oh, Jesus. That was funded by you all. And I'm a little bit tardy in getting it in. I got really busy at the end of the year, but we're really close now. Um, the problem is that Michael and I are discovering all these new sites right at the end here. I think we've been to 4 sites in the last 10 days. It's all right because we kind of knew about them. Although it's been fantastic to visit all these sites. Although yesterday I had the first nasty thing happen. I had a giant boulder fall on my leg. 2 boulders. The size like 18 by 18. I'm okay. I'm just hobbling around. Nothing broke. I had Michael Haas, the retired veterinarian, check me over and help me home, and I'll be fine. But it's just been fantastic visiting all these sites. The last one we went to is 200 feet from my house, maybe 300. I've fished past it many times, but I never really equated it with a mill, just an old structure. But indeed, it was a mill. So this project was to look at the mills and other historic structures on the Missisquoi Trout and its tributaries, or some of its tributaries. I was helped by Michael Haas here in Lowell and Sam Thurston, who is the primary author of the Lowell history book, just put out by our historical society. So why did these people seek waterways to build their structures? I mean, if you think about it, many of these structures, people came through the wilderness for many weeks or months to get here. I forget which town it is, but in one town, a settler came from Bradford in March and came up to Hazen's Notch and then traveled down the ice on Trout River and then down the Trout to the Missisquoi. And I think it was eventually they made their way to Richford on the ice. So all the traveling, once they got past the Bailey Hazen Road, was on the ice because, nice big open smooth surface. It provided a great, as long as the ice was firm, a great way to get around the landscape. So in our case, the Missisquoi is big enough that the river itself runs year round and could power water wheels. That's the same for some of our larger tributaries, such as the Burgess Branch here in Lowell, the Jay Branch in Troy and Jay, and Tyler Branch over west of the mountains. I'm sure there were other ones that could support mills year round too, but it certainly made it easier to not to have to build a mill pond necessarily and still have water to run your power. Many of these mills were built around waterfalls or cascades because the drop in elevation provided a natural head. The amount of energy you get with water is largely dependent upon the elevational differences between your turbine or water wheel and the elevation that the water is being drawn off at. So many of these sites are somewhere near a waterfall where there's a natural drop. You find that in most villages there was a mill pond, so that dams were built and water was held up behind the dams, or several mill ponds. Excuse me, I'm a little under the weather, so I may end up in a coughing fit here at some point. Not many of our mill ponds still exist today. You probably have heard that there's been an effort to restore mill ponds by a hydrologist in the state who's been working for about 15 years, thinking that the ponds were already there that if they could be turned into small scale hydro in those villages, they may be able to provide some benefit to the village. I don't know how far she's gotten. There's, of course, a lot of environmental impacts from mill ponds, but nonetheless. I just saw a recent picture of Richford. It had quite a mill pond. Lowell, of course, had one right behind my house here near the post office. And I think most villages did. And when you have a mill pond, you can draw water off with a, an iron penstock that runs from the mill pond downhill to some sort of, turbine or water wheel, which was quite common. There's one that you can still see today that you guys, if you haven't been to it, you have to, and that's the Ovid Mill in Enosburg on the Tyler Branch. To this day, the penstock is still alongside the river. It doesn't go all the way back to a mill pond because the dam has been removed. But the mill is still standing and still has a large amount of its original mill equipment. It was a grist mill that's currently being nominated for the National Historic Places Register. I may not have gotten that name right, but anyways. So if you had a source of water that you could direct constantly over the top of a water wheel or under the bottom, you could turn the water wheel, which could be hooked to gears and or belts. And many of our early mills were of that sort, either an overshoot or an undershoot mill. And I'll show some illustrations of those in a second. Turbines were often used as well. And I'll show a little clip of a video that shows a turbine turning a grist mill. It's kind of neat. Turbines can be, in a large open round space that water channeled into that location where it turns a turbine, or in some cases, there can be many small turbines all hooked to individual gears or belts to run some machinery that needed energy in the mill. You think of for instance, a wool mill having many different functions that need to be powered, and oftentimes separate belts led to separate, series of sewing machines or carding racks to help straighten out and get ready the wool for fabric making. In some cases, these mill ponds were just used to clean logs. I believe the mill pond behind my house that was associated with the Silsbee Mill back in the 1800s and early 1900s, I think the only purpose of that mill pond was really to clean off the logs after coming in out of, the muddy woods. In some cases, dams were used to hold back water and wood and then opened up during the spring freshet to, drive large amounts of water and wood downstream to a mill that was ready to collect that wood. I thought that's what was happening behind my house because we have a 15-foot waterfall just downstream. And I was like, how could they get wood over that and ship it downstream? But in fact, I don't think they did in the end. They just processed it right behind my house and used the mill pond to clean the wood. All right. So some general types of mills. On the left, we have a typical mill, grist mill, where a water wheel turns gears that then turn large stones that, or one stone with another large stationary stone that grinds grains such as corn and wheat and then channels it to a collection bin on the outside of the millstones. It's a whole elaborate process. It's pretty neat. After looking at all these mills, I just feel like the jump in technology that these people made after, moving through the wilderness and getting to these sites and saying, yeah, let's build a mill, and what they had to do. It's like sending people to the moon, if you ask me. It's pretty impressive. I won't spend a lot of time here. On the far right, and I don't know if you can see that, the up and down mill, is that covered by our faces? That's a pretty neat mill, that just turns a saw blade. And these were the early, most of the early wood mills in Vermont, and including in our area, were these up and down, and sometimes called sash mills. And the blades moved incredibly slowly. So, they didn't have any gearing that increased the speed of the blade like the modern wood mill did. It had gearing that greatly increases the number of times or RPMs that a saw blade moves, if assuming it's round. And also, I should mention that these straight blades, like the ones in the early up and down sash mills, were replaced in the mid to late 1800s by steam and round blades for the most part. This doesn't look like it's going to work. Yeah. So this is a video of an Ontario mill. That's pretty fascinating. So he's now opening. I'll let him talk.
Jeff, I'm not hearing the description. I don't know if you want to relay.
Other people?
I'm not hearing anything either.
Am I on mute?
No sound here either.
No, you're not on mute, but there's no sound coming with your video.
Oh, that's funny because it's loud and clear for me.
Yeah, you have to share your sound, and it's a tricky thing to do, Jeff.
Are you screen sharing? Yes.
Yeah, but when you screen share, there's a box in the bottom left that says you share sound also. You have to click that box.
Yeah, there's a box in the bottom left that says share sound. And you have to click that as well.
I have 8 boxes, and none of them tell me what they do when I hover over it.
No.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine, Jeff.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. It's just not the video.
So they just put the grain in, and the grain is being transferred uphill by an elevator that's hooked to a belt that's run by water. The grain elevator and the bin are sealed, he's saying. So there's the belts operating. So the wheat is sent to the millstones. They open the turbines, and it's turning there are 2 large millstones inside. The upper stone rotates as it's doing there. And you've probably seen some of these millstones around.
Somebody wanted to stay harvest holes tomorrow night. So it's not going to be home.
The lower stone does not move. So grain is opening in the center there. And those lines channel the ground wheat to the outside. They're controlling the distance between the stones with those wheels. and that will, determine the, how much the grain is how small it's ground. A lot of times the stones, if they run dry, will create sparks, and that's why grist mills burn. So he's turning the gates to allow water to enter the turbines. And now you're seeing the turbines turning the millstones. The flour at this point is called grist, and that's where the name comes from. All right, it requires a little more processing before it becomes flour. He's checking the fineness of the grist coming out of the millstones. All right, I think I'll quit there if that's good. It's you can find that online. It's in Ontario. It's really the only good video out there of an operational mill that goes back to the 1880s. All right, I got to figure out how to get. So there were a bunch of different mill types. They're grist mills, and communities that didn't have a grist mill did a number of different things to grind their grain. One of the most common ones was to take a sapling, hook it up onto supporting logs, tie a rope to the end of it, and then with leather hook up a large stone and find a hollowed out tree, or you got to hollow it out, the stump, pour your grain into the hollowed out stump, and then you do this, up and down motion with your sapling on a support, and the rock goes down and crushes the grain. It doesn't seem very accurate, and in fact, it's or precise. What's that?
Jeff, it's Michael. I think I still have your video in front of your slide.
I know.
Oh, okay.
I'm hitting the. That's because I'm talking about the writing at the top, which I don't know if you can still see.
Okay. Yeah. No.
The
okay.
other.
Go for it.
The other types of mills were starch mills. I think every town we came across had a starch mill. Anybody want to guess what that was and what they made and for what product? I thought it was to make starch for food products. And in fact, it was usually using potatoes to create stiffeners for fabrics. I don't know, I doubt it was just local, but I guess it could be if there was a fabric mill in town and you needed starch products to hold up the collars on the shirts and stuff like that. But anyways.
Yeah, there was the starch mill in Westfield up on Bulgron Road at one time. Can't tell you the exact site, but I've read that in some of the Westfield history.
Nice. We may have seen some of the remains of that last week. We found remains of perhaps 2 mills in the mill ground campground, but one of them was way up towards Ballfield Road. So it may very well be the one you're talking about. And then, of course, there were lots of bobbin mills. Bobbins were used as spools in garment making. And at one point, Vermont, I don't think I've read this, but we were certainly one of the larger producers of bobbins in the United States. Montgomery had enormous bobbin production capabilities. The Black Falls Mill, I believe, produced bobbins. You can correct me on that, Michael, if I'm wrong. And then, of course, near Trout River, there were bobbin mills as well. What else? Clapboards, of course, flooring. My floors in my house, if you look on the underside, say Lowell Mill on it. They were made behind my house. I don't know, 1880, 1900. My house is older than that, of course. It's from 1860s. So it's pretty cool to have your floors made on the mill behind your house. And then, of course, butter tubs was really, really an extensive industry here in Vermont. I suspect in upstate New York and maybe as far west as the Great Lakes. I'm not sure. But certainly in Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, butter tubs was a very big industry. And I'll show you a picture of one or two. Rake teeth. And I must admit, I don't know what these rakes were used for, but they were wooden teeth on the rakes. Yeah. Jacques, what were they used for?
They were rake hay, Jeff.
They were what?
Rake hay into windrows.
Oh yeah, well.
Jake, am I right?
That's what I was trying to get myself off mute to say.
Yep.
They were about maybe almost 3 feet, maybe 5-6 inch wood teeth that people used to do hand raking.
Yeah, I certainly knew it wasn't the leaves. Cool. And then there were, of course, lots of items made out of wood. Some of it was dressed and planed. There were planers, and some of it was rough lumber. Some of it was quite detailed wood. I don't know if there were actually lathes producing, turned wood and products such as that we didn't come across that I can remember.
Those rake teeth you were just talking about were round, so I'm not sure how they made them, but
maybe with a lathe.
Probably the ones I've seen were all round.
Yep. Neat.
And bobbins. I've got a wooden hay rake in my garage.
Nice. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the towns, and of course we started here in Lowell, in the headwaters region. We looked both at mill sites on the Missisquoi and the Burgess Branch. We're blessed in this town with lots of old remains. We didn't even visit all of them. So right behind my house was the Silsby Mill from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. They say it went out of business before the 1927 flood, so a few years before. And that's a picture of the old mill there down in the valley, right by the post office in town, the old picture. In this one, we're lucky enough to have found old remains of it under the water. So I dove and took pictures of the sawmill blade. This blade, I think that mill always was steam. So this was a steam powered sawmill blade. And then I found the old logging boom materials. I'll go back this summer and look for more. They're kind of buried. They're impossible to bring up. And I don't think you'd want to anyways. But it's pretty cool that they're there. There was a dam associated and a mill pond with this. And this is, of course, all on the East Branch of the Missisquoi. We had an elder in town. I don't know if you knew her, Jacques, Ola LaPlante. She was a Cree woman. And she, was here from, I believe, 1918 on or something. And she remembers standing on the bridge that, would get you across the river at the mill pond. And she told us about a story in town where one of the workers that was running logs in the river or in the mill pond was out on the logs, fell in, and the foreman yelled, "Forget the man, save the peavey," which is the tool he was using. And apparently that was the cocktail party joke for many years in Lowell after that.
I've heard that
Um,
same term used on log drives.
Yeah, yeah.
It sounds pretty cruel, but I think I don't know. They had more men than they had PVs, I guess. PV is a tool to turn logs, in case somebody's wondering what we're talking
Right.
about.
So in the village, we have recently discovered other remains. The ones we were at yesterday, I'd seen them before, but I hadn't really, like I said, they hadn't registered as mills. So there's plenty of. I think there's 2 other mills right in the village that have remains, and they'll be in the report, of course. But other than that, we spent a lot of time on Burgess Branch, which is the large tributary coming off of Belvedere. And there we've got the Heinz rake tooth mill that was likely powered by an overshot wheel. And the remains are in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And they're still there. That was just a little while ago we took that picture. So it's quite incredible remains. There was a starch mill just downstream from that, but it has much smaller remains. And both these sites used a sluice that drew water out of the Burgess Branch into a confined area. But we don't, well, I guess we do know it was an overshot mill. So somehow or another, they had to either dig down or create enough height to get an overshot mill to work at that site, because it's down in a deep valley. And I guess we don't really know how they managed to use an overshot wheel at that site. But all right, up to Westfield. Of course, the first mills in town were up on Mill Brook. I believe the Mill Brook picture there in the middle, Ballfield Road, is just to the right there. And a little bit to the left is a waterfall that I swim at when I'm playing tennis, you know, cross the street and run up the road a little bit. And I think it's the same remains. It's quite a sight. There's a little cascade and a waterfall there. There was good head. And people built there early because the village itself was quite wet and prone to flooding. And so the first mills were up above the flats of the village. The millstone at the Millbrook campground is still there, and that's the picture of it from just a couple of weeks ago. It's more than likely the millstone from the grist mill, the Hitchcock mill in town. I included a picture of the bobbin mill there. That's is a little bit hidden by your view there, but I also included some other things with the bobbin mill. When I first moved here, and I'm sure a bunch of you have done this, you read the menu at the Bobbin Mill restaurant, because that building was an old administrative building for the Bobbin Mill, and then it became an arts and crafts store and numerous things over the years.
So
go ahead.
One advantage of being a little more elder than some of you is that I can remember my dad delivering maple logs at that mill when we lived up on Buck Hill. And they cut all those logs into 10-inch blocks, and they had they'd split them into squares and then turn them on a lathe. So it was, it employed around 30 some odd people. When I started going to school in Westfield, where the community center is now, in the fall of 1956, I believe, I can still remember they had a steam whistle there that would blow at 7 o'clock in the morning, at noon, at 1 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And a majority of the men who worked at that mill would walk home in the village for lunch and back. So it was quite the thing. And they had that was steam powered. They used the water from that little brook to wash their logs. They had
it was a tiny brook.
Yeah. And they had this log boom that, I think in the previous slide, I think you could see it, the the slide just before this one. I remember that building just as it was. And let me see, I guess that's the stack that we see, but they had a boom in the yard where they used a horse to pull, it's a kind of a big pulley block, and that's how they moved their logs around the yard. And in the left of that picture, you see kind of a chute on the left, and that's where all the waste from the bobbins would slide into a truck. They'd put that in there. This guy, Gerard Meunier, is the first, or maybe the last one that hauled, had 2 trucks there, and he'd haul all these 10-inch little, bobbins, not wasted, but defective bobbins and all the waste, and people would use that for their cook stoves. So it's kind of interesting. I remember that mill looking just like that. And I think it closed around 1960, maybe or so. And then you heard the next steps from from Jeff a few minutes ago.
It will be.
Yeah, go ahead.
We could have written a book on the bobbin mill with all the material that Westfield gave us. I have a stack over there on the other side of the room. That's the bobbin mill information that at some point we're going to give back to the town soon. Anyone ever eat there?
Oh yeah,
I
drink.
Did. Oh,
it used to be a pretty good bar.
Great breakfast.
Yeah. It was
All
quite.
Right.
It was also the home of the old bobbin mill players. I don't know if anybody has ever heard that term. In the last few years that it operated, there was a group of people, mostly retired people, that would go there every Wednesday morning for coffee and breakfast, and they'd bring their fiddle or their guitar or whatever. And that became kind of a tradition. And eventually when that closed, they moved, they did it at the Westfield Community Center. Then they ended up doing it in Lowell for a while. And I don't know whatever became of it, but they probably all just got old. Maybe I should stop talking. It's Jeff's presentation, not mine.
That's okay, Jacques. There's still people playing at the community center. There were a few years ago anyways, but
yeah,
I don't know if it's the same people.
Yeah.
So the other site with remains in Westfield, and Westfield is a little bit lacking in remains. And it's our thought that we're going to put this out there and people are going to say, well, I know where, and we're going to find out about more of these remains. Certainly in Richford, especially on the tributaries, Lucas Brook, and in the south, the Goff Mill Brook, which has a different name on the map. There was nothing identified that we would just had to walk up on private property and spend all day looking around in the bush, because there was never sites identified precisely. But my guess is that they're going to be at some point when people see this publication and get excited about it. That's our hope. Michael Haas is spending endless hours researching deeds on these sites in the town halls. And is Michael, you want to say something? I think you could write your own book on or brochure on each one of these sites, because one of these sites, the owner knew one of your old best friends or something. And you want to?
Yeah, a veterinary school classmate is married into the family that owned the Ovid grist mill. But the one thing I can tell you, this little factoid, Jeff, from just the research I did at Lowell town office today, is that those floors of yours almost certainly date from the 1860s, when your house was built, from Silas Works mill.
Really?
Or from what? Yeah, I think so.
So that's the mill that the boulder hit me at.
Yeah. Well, now I think he might have operated a saw there as well in the early days, but yeah. So but I wouldn't doubt your floors are from 1860. Okay, nice. I'll bow out and let you continue the talking.
All right. So I don't know how many of you have seen the Coburn Brook sawmill. It's on Kennison Road, heading out of town, and it's just down beneath the bridge. And I've driven over that bridge 100 times and never looked. And sure enough, this incredible structure is down there. It was a sawmill. In the report, I think we can identify a name associated with it. Maybe not for this one. Old maps don't have a name. They just say sawmill. But there was probably a sluice there, but we also that directed water behind the wall that you see. And then you can see in the middle a little square opening, which may have been the site where the water came out of the mill and went back into the river. You have to look pretty hard to see it, but it's right in the middle there on the bottom. And as you can tell from this picture, it's quite the drop, so that they can get a good amount of head at this site. So I encourage you to go check this site out off Kennison. We are going to put in our brochure a warning to people that most of these sites are on private land and that they should seek some sort of permission before going on to these sites if it involves trampling across somebody's property. If you're out in the middle of nowhere and it's not posted, that may be a different story, especially if you're in the middle of the river or on the edge of the river. That's kind of public domain anyways, or public trust property if you're below high water mark. All right, moving on. Troy, North Troy. So Troy and North Troy, of course, had quite the history around the bridge in North Troy itself, where we have the electrical power generation plant. And that's the picture I have here all the way to the right. You have to climb under a fence to get this picture because it's off limits to people. And if you look closely at this site, you'll see some old stones, but a lot of the old stones are covered by concrete, which is typical. We found that throughout the project area that many of the old stone structures had a layer of concrete on it to hold it in place. And so, this site is probably an amalgam of all the old mills that were there. And there were a ton of large veneer mills, and one mill at one point, I forget if it's the Blair veneer mill, provided 200 jobs to local people. So that's quite an important site, but very few identifiable remains. Conversely, Troy has one of the most interesting sites, and that's the old Phelps Falls Iron Foundry, which I think some of you have seen. Lindsay, you're shaking your head if you kayaked the gorge there and came out to this old structure and said, "What the heck?" It's an iron ore mine, with the iron ore being discovered to the southeast, closer to the village, and then processed over not that long at this site, with the walls still standing. There is a sluice way that bypasses the gorge, and I don't know if you guys have seen that. To the wood side of the gorge, there's dynamited rock into a long tunnel, and that channeled water from the Missisquoi out of the gorge to turn a turbine that fired a bellows that put fired oxygen into the kiln that was creating the iron or the steel, because you needed iron, I guess, because you needed really hot temperatures. So in this case, I first thought maybe they were using it for a cooling process, but I read a lot on early iron ore mines, and the water was most likely used to drive a bellows to fan the fire. The thing we don't know is, what were they burning? And you'd think it'd be wood, and it probably was, but many of them also burn coal. And I have not found a record that identifies what they were burning for their primary fuel at this site. This is a great site. It's hard to get to unless you're canoeing. You really have to go on private property, and we of course advise that you get permission. I don't think there'll be a mad rush to this place because it is such work to get into it. one of
Hey,
the other
Jeff.
sites. Questions?
Yeah. Russ asked which one is Phelps Falls. And yeah, I haven't heard that name. I think, Russ, that it's what we call Little John Falls. But
No.
where did you guys find?
Second or third.
Okay.
It's either the second or third one. And if you need the portage, River Right is the easiest way through.
Yeah.
And that puts you right at that little foundry.
Yeah, the last 6 feet is a little steep and unequal, but that's what I did when I mapped
Where
knotweed.
did you come across the name Phelps Falls?
Oh, on every map and every historical document talks about this being Phelps Falls. So I figured I'd use the name. Any other questions about the iron ore foundry? It has quite a complicated history. A lot of money was put into it. At one point, there was housing built next to it. And we found the old foundations from old structures. But in the end, it was not a moneymaker. And so it got passed from one owner to the next. The thing that ultimately killed it was a tariff put on, and it must have been by Canada, you would think, or by the US. Most of the iron ore made here was sent to Canada, and a tariff created it in a situation where economically it didn't pay to keep sending it across the border. So they closed it down ultimately. All right, now there's a site right above J4 Corners. That's an old starch manufacturing mill. So if you just cross the street from the parking lot at J4 Corners swimming hole and go upstream there's a big vacation home right on the river there that has recently fallen into the hands of a family that is likely to care a lot about this site in terms of its history. I'm working for the Sun doing wetland work. There's a waterfall there that's probably 4 feet high that's covered in concrete. I didn't know it. I went up there, and all of a sudden I noticed the waterfall was not natural, although it may have been, just put over a natural falls. But you're looking at you can see the circular area on the right. That would have been a penstock running through there. And the supports that I showed you in the first slide, the beginning slide, the 8 foot high stone supports would have been holding that penstock as well. And those were down below this. All right, so next time you go to J4 Corners, you got to go upstream too, but do it in the river valley if you can. It's pretty easy, actually. Oh, there's the Blair plant in North Troy. You can see how big it was and how prominent it was. And there's people working in the veneer plant. And they made one of the most interesting things that was made at this plant were the sounding boards within pianos. And they were made of veneer. And at one point, this was the only producer of piano sounding boards, which is the thing that absorbs the ivory sound and spreads it throughout the entire piano. And the only New England piano sounding board manufacturer was Blair Veneer, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Jeff, is the river in that picture just in front of that SO sign?
Yeah, it is. Yep. Or I can't.
Yes,
it is. Just behind the SO. I would think.
So yeah, where that SO sign is, that's the bridge. So the river is right down there, just this side of the big building.
Between the SO and the building.
Sure. And I remember, so my mom is 93 years old, and before she got married, she worked in that mill for a couple of years. I'm not sure just what she was doing, but it was probably like whatever those guys are dragging those thin sheets or something. I have an uncle that worked there. He's passed away now, but worked his whole career there. Yeah, that was quite the place. It was Blair, and then it became Weyerhaeuser, I believe, after that.
Yeah.
And then eventually it closed down, and that's where Old Mill Troy was situated after those buildings. I can't remember if that burned down or if they tore it down or what, but I remember seeing it just like that.
What's the Old Mill Troy?
Old Mill Troy is a name that was called that because that was a mill, and they make cattle feed, but they don't do it there anymore.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's
that place burned.
There's a company still called Old Mill Troy, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That place
Lindsay,
burned.
should I pick up my pace here? I think we thought it was going to be 10 minutes.
Yeah, maybe a little quicker so we can get to some of the business stuff tonight. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, Enosburg. Of course, we've got the big remains and I can't see my own writing because it's covered. What's it called there? Sampsonville. That, you know, was the Atlas Plywood Company that was transformed into a power maker that provided electricity to the village of Enosburg. I'm not sure it actually was to the, I think it was to the village of Enosburg. You can still go inside this structure. And I think there's actually money this year, right, in your budget to remove some of the old dams that occurred at this site. There's a natural drop here, but there were various dams built here. First one was wood, second one was concrete to create a mill pond of sorts at this site. And then, of course, Enosburg has the Ovid Grist Mill, and this is the pictures of the Ovid Grist Mill on Tyler Branch. The Tyler Branch was really where the first mills in Enosburg were found. They were, in fact, found here at Kidder Hole, which is a spectacular gorge just upstream from Ovid Mill. It's currently owned by, the land is owned by a farmer right across the street. He was very excited that we were doing this work and invited us in once he found out we were Montreal Canadian fans, not Boston Bruin fans. He had us in and we sat and chatted with him for quite a while. There's not a whole lot of material here in terms of remains. We think most of the metal that we see near it is farm implements thrown down into it. But there are remains near the end that look as if they could have been a structure, a square structure. There's even possibly a dam, some old remains of a dam going across the river beneath this gorge and waterfall. It'd be a neat site to go back, you know, with a metal detector and do additional work and maybe dive to see if you can find anything in the pool here. So anyways, that's Enosburg. Richford, of course, the falls in town, the ledges are and always have been since the 1800s, the most important site for mills. There were a number of mills there. The problem with the ledge site is that it's subject to flooding, and early floods wiped out all of the mills there and took all the soils off the ledges there. The flood of 1927 wiped out everything at the falls. There was a long litany of mills there, every kind of mill you can imagine, wool carding, sawmills, grist mills, but also mill ponds and garment factories. And here is the inside of the Heinz Mill, where they made overalls and uniforms, and it was primarily women. I can't get the information to determine if this was run by water power or not. I spent a lot of time in historical, looking at historical sources, and I still do not know if this was water powered or not. The other big mill right at the falls there was the Sweat and Cummings, and that should be Commings, not Cummings with a U, although I think it is written as that in some cases. This was a blinds and sashes and furniture mill It opened as early as the 1870s and persisted until, in some form, until the 1980s. And in fact, the building that's on the water there next to the medical center may have been a building associated with this mill. We tried to go in it. We were taken there by a medical center employee who was on the hush hush, couldn't tell anyone. And we peeked into the basement, but there were boards all over the basement with nails sticking straight up, rusty nails and broken glass. And we didn't have powerful flashlights. So we didn't keep going into the depths of the building to see if there was anything still remaining at that site. And I don't know. That's for the next phase of this project. Lindsay's
Jeff,
saying, "Oh no!"
I had been told that there was a hydroelectric facility there, down under, and that the copper was taken out at some point.
The hydro facility would have been very important. I know that at one point the mills at this location burned, but the power producing turbine in the basement was saved, and that they built back up around that turbine in a very short period of time. These mills were so important that every time you read about a mill burning, you read, and then the community got together, took donations, and the mill was built, rebuilt by May the following summer, because it was just the center of life for these people. It was a way to make money, a way to make food. Cider mills were common. These mills were of utmost importance to these communities. So anyways, Jacques, you look like you got something on the tip of your tongue. No? Okay. I just thought I'd put a couple pictures. Oh, that's the same picture there. There, it's got the correct spelling. But the one on the upper left is kind of cool because that's the floodwaters of the Missisquoi coming right down through the village in 1927. And I had to put that in there. Just the pictures alone that we've uncovered from this work could make an interesting, little publication. The ones that we won't be able to put in, the finished brochure. So we are 95% done writing, or 93% done writing. We've identified, we've gone to all of our sites. We just need someone to organize the brochure. And unfortunately, I had put in the budget money for Aaron Worthley, my business partner, to do that. His father's in a hospice, so he is dealing with family issues and will be for a couple of weeks potentially. So we're kind of on hold in getting it published. Sam Thurston has told me that he's interested in having the Lowell Historical Society kick in a couple $100 so that we can make upwards of 100 copies of this instead of the 20 that we budgeted for. So we may get matching funds from the Lowell Historical Society. We'll have to talk about it because he said, then we can go out and charge people for it. And I don't know how that works with the overall budget, but we could talk about it. All righty. I'm going to stop sharing. I think that's it. Oh, I forgot Montgomery. All right. It was still to come. I won't dwell on it. I've already used too much of your time. The giant butter tub on the Trout River, the Nelson and Hall tub. Does anyone know if there are remains on the trout from this? I've walked upstream on the trout 200 times, up to the restaurant, the Belfry, and I've never seen anything. But I realized I hadn't been on the right side of the river, or river left if you're canoeing. And has anyone ever seen remains up there?
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
What about down in the village? There are remains in the village.
By Grandpa
Unless-
Grunt's.
No, the
Oh,
village.
No,
not
Jeff,
the center.
just above the village center. Somebody told me the other day, and I've actually seen them. I didn't realize what they were, but there are some remains that are up at one of the swimming holes.
Yeah, in Montgomery, the center is where Sylvester's and the restaurants are.
Yes.
The village is the little collection closer to East Berkshire.
Yeah.
And if you go in there on the left, there's a gorge and there are foundations in there.
We're writing about it. We went there, of course.
Yeah, we have
That's
those.
not the Nelson Hall butter tub mill, though.
Okay.
That's a different mill. And the cool thing about that mill is there was a raceway across the road that directed water from the tributary on the other side of the road, under the road there. And we have found sort of the, the contours of where it may have been, but no remains. All right, so to move on, the other sites Montgomery is so rich in sites and in history that Michael's been struggling with it for weeks, trying to get it down less than 40 pages. So it's gonna tell some great stories. On the South Branch, there are old butter tub mills as well, including these remains right down on the river, and that's a wall behind it that you see, the straight line. That's an old historic wall as well. And then here are the things made at the Nelson and Hall Mill and the Black Falls Mill up Black Falls, and they include cases for old RCA Victrolas, and they actually have one in the Historical Society that they bought on eBay, I believe. And butter tubs, such as what you see in the lower right there. These butter tubs were made, we're not sure this very butter tub was, but up at the Black Falls remains, which is up in the upper right hand corner, which we just went to last week. I worked for the summer in Black Falls doing the evaluation before the state bought it. And I had never been down that fork in the road to find these old remains, which were fantastic. Although I don't recommend a lot of people going up there. The owner who lives there, his house is surrounded by these structures. That being said, you could probably introduce yourself and ask if you can walk around and look at these things. Anyways, what's that? 1.5 million tubs made in Montgomery at one point. The Nelson Hill Mill up Trout River made the vast majority of them. The boxes were reused, but the tubs, I believe, were not, because they didn't really become rancid, did they? But they took on some of the moisture of the butter and stuff, so they generally weren't reused, which is good for the people making the tubs. All right, this time I'm really done. I didn't want to slight Montgomery there, so I know we have lots of Montgomery folks.
This was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah,
I really
very
enjoyed
good.
that.
That must have been fun. Thanks for starting the dive into seeing what's out there. I'm sure there's way more to learn. I look forward to reading your report. And
there is way more to learn, and I think probably many more sites, especially on the little tributaries, that have something there. And I'm hopeful that this process gets people interested in finding those sites and letting other people know, and maybe we can do this again in 10 years.
right.
Jeff, I want to jump in for 1 second and beg Lindsay's indulgence, and it'll just take that because we have such a great audience here. The place name Skunk's Misery in Montgomery, does that mean anything to anybody?
he's in the weeds. Just nod and shake your head.
Okay, great. No, just wanted, if somebody did, I'd get in touch with you separately and find out where it is. Thanks.
In Berkshire,
Yeah.
on Skunk Hollow Road, there was an old grist mill. So it's, if you were to take North Road.
Yeah, there is a Skunk's Misery Road up near Franklin, but this is down.
No, that's Franklin. I know where that is. That's where the winery is.
Okay.
But no, in Berkshire Center. So after you've gone on 118, if you're going north on 118, right after the next right is North Road. Go up North Road and you'll turn, it's more of a fork, but it is the Skunk Hollow Road. And the first house on your left was a grist mill.
Oh, okay.
And also, and John, behind Laufers, I'm pretty sure, and that's in West Berkshire, that there was a mill on that fall too. And they're both connected to the Pike River.
Right. Yep. So Carol, you said at the fork, go right or left at the fork for Skunk Hollow?
Oh, take a left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Head to Potato Hill?
Well, you'll end up coming around.
Yeah.
So if you get to my house, you've gone too far. But there was a small, it's a really small building, and it's a house now, has been a house since we've lived here.
Is it that blue, it's blue house?
I don't know. It was red for years and years and years.
Okay, but I think I know where you're talking on that road.
Yeah.
There is a house that looks like an old.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys have other locations that these guys should check, send us a message. Everyone on the screen should have at least Sarah's contact, and we'll make sure to get that to Michael. And
here's a question for you. You know, in the paragraphs where I'm describing people not trespassing and where I'm thanking you, and do you want me to put that a sentence in saying if you know of sites?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'd be happy to
contact you guys.
Potentials.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I was thinking of saying just contact Jacques Kucher and he'll tell you about it, but no thanks.
I wouldn't mind talking, but I'm not as old as I sound, or maybe some of you think. It's interesting though to dig back into some old, stories like that. It's great.
Does anyone have any last questions for Jeff or Michael before we move to the business portion of the evening?
Can I ask just a real quick question? In looking into Richford, did you ever come across any kinds of mills on the Loveland Brook?
Only reference to mills on the Loveland Brook, but no reference to specific locations.
Because that's what runs through our property. And I know I had read somewhere that there was a mill somewhere, but we're only on one segment of it. And I don't know if it's lower than us or above us.
One of the streams in the area had a mill down below, and then their son moved upstream and built one higher up in the watershed. And but it's that type of information that we have in Richford in spades, and it's just not good enough unless you want to spend a lot of time, with your rubber boots on, walking up these streams and trying not to violate people's, property rights and stuff, which believe me, I'm going to do after finding out about these places, in as many places as I can. But
and what was the mill in East Richford? there's the remains of a dam still there in the main stem of the river.
In East Richford, there were lots of mills in East Richford, but I believe, well, I think there was a grist and a sawmill in East Richford. It's one of the areas that is not ending up in our brochure, just because you know we're in the process of weeding out too much information at this point. It's not like we're going to throw it out, but it's just not going to make the brochure. You try to find sites where you've got information. It's nice to have a story for each town. It's nice to have remains on the river, so that you can show pictures, and it's nice to have old pictures as well. You know, only in rare situations do we have all of that for each, you know, for a single site. But because of that, places like East Richford that are mentioned in the Richford history books, but nothing else, you know, probably won't make this cut of the brochure. But
well, I am gonna stop the recording. Thanks, Jeff, for that, and thank you, Michael, for all of you guys' hard work. And I look forward to learning more. If folks do have questions that they want directed to these guys, again, if you don't have their contact info, I can direct questions to them. And we look forward to seeing what comes out of it. Thank you, guys.
all right.
Thank
I'm gonna
you.
go get